Ladies and gentlemen, today is Saturday, February the 28th, the last day in the month of February. That means that tomorrow, the 11th hour, will officially become the 12th hour in terms of the WNBA CBA discussions. So, obviously, we've got some news to talk about, and let's go ahead and get into it right now. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the CC Report. And today, it's another update in the CBA discussions. It's been about a week since the last time that we spoke. And in that intervening week, we've had a lot of things to catch up on. We're, as I said in the intro, moving into the month of March. And the 11th hour is quickly becoming the 12th hour, so to speak. We are necessarily looking at right now a situation where if we don't get a CBA done in the next couple of days, we are necessarily going to lose games for the 2026 WNBA regular season. And so with all of that being said, obviously there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of things to talk about. But first, just from a big picture standpoint, we have a players association right now that is divided in terms of how best to move forward. We have a players association that is upset with the current situation, upset with the league, and they're right to be upset, to be perfectly honest. But in terms of how to best to move forward, we've got a players association right now that seems to be uncertain as to how exactly it is going to move forward. And let's just start off with a discussion about how we got here. On February the 23rd, a collective bargaining session was held between the WNBA and the WNBA Players Association. It was a contentious 2-hour-long meeting, but the big news coming out of that 2-hour-long meeting was that the WNBA presented the Players Association with a schedule moving forward, and it also presented them with a drop-dead date, and that drop-dead date is March the 10th. That is the date where if we don't have a CBA agreed upon by that time, we will necessarily lose games. And so let's take a look at Alexa Philippou's reporting regarding that meeting. According to Alexa, on February 23rd, over 50 WNBA players met today with league staff, its labor relations committee, and owners for a continued dialogue over their positions amid the now 16th-month-long CBA talk. WNBA Players Association leaders will meet to discuss next steps, including a response to the WNBA's proposal from last Friday. And further to that discussion, we have The Athletic reporting on what was the presented schedule for the league moving forward if we get a collective bargaining agreement agreed upon by March the 10th. And let's take a look at what that schedule implicates. Now, the drop-dead date was given March the 10th, but after March the 10th, there's going to be a moratorium on league business, assuming that the CBA is agreed upon until the end of March. The reason for this is that the lawyers have to go back into the back rooms and actually hammer out what the pen to paper CBA is going to look like and as negotiated by the league and by the Players Association. They have to actually put it in writing. They have to get all the details finalized, and they have to get it ratified by the league and also by the WNBA Players Association. And the hope is to have that process completed by March 31st. And so once that happens, at that point, the league can resume business as usual. The league can do no business while there is not actual pen to paper. So the entire month of March, we're not going to have any news from the WNBA in terms of after the CBA is signed. Assuming the CBA is signed by March the 10th, we're not going to have any news from them. The day after that, business will resume, and they're going to hit the ground running on April the 1st, the day after the contract is signed. Portland and Toronto will receive their protected player lists from each team around the league, the presumably 5 players per team that are going to be protected against the expansion drafts. Then the Final Four in the national championship will take place over the weekend as far as the NCAA is concerned. After that national championship game on April the 6th, will be the expansion draft, and that will be the first order of business that the league will take care of after the CBA is completed. The day after the expansion draft, pre-free agency will begin. This is the period where teams can talk to restricted free agents and make sure that they are getting offers to come back to the team. This is the period where you're going to have discussions between teams and different free agents reaching agreements during this 5-day period of time, which is ridiculous. You're going to see teams reach agreements with free agents, either for them to come back to their original teams or for them to go to new teams. Then April the 12th, free agency will start. This is when players will put pen to paper and sign with their new teams. The day after free agency starts, the college draft will occur. So we've had, from the Final Four in the national championship game on April the 5th, 1 week will expire, and then they will have the college draft. Meanwhile, free agency will have taken place. This is all happening at the same time. It's all happening simultaneously. It's going to be a circus. But the college draft will be on April the 13th. Then on April the 19th, WNBA camps start. So free agency talks will start on April the 7th. People will start putting pen to paper on April the 12th. And then April the 19th, that should all be settled. And WNBA camps start. And keep in mind, it's not just the teams that have to settle free agency. The free agents themselves have to put pen to paper. Then they have to move. Then they have to start integrating themselves with their new teammates and with their new communities. This is all going to happen over the period of a couple of weeks. And this is assuming that the March 10th deadline is met by the WNBA Players Association and by the league. And then we'll have an abbreviated training camp starting on April the 19th. 6 days after that is when preseason games begin, with an eye towards May the 8th, which is when the regular season is scheduled to tip off. If that March 10th deadline is not met, all of these dates will be pushed, and we are necessarily going to have lost games. So the question is, how was that abbreviated schedule presented by the league? How was that received by the player base? And the answer is not super well, according to Tom Friend and Sports Business Journal. Let's go take a look at that article right here. The headline, WNBA says season impacted if no deal by March the 10th. Players wonder where the urgency has been. And I'm just going to read a couple of pertinent paragraphs. Considering the league waited 6 weeks to reply to a union request in mid-December for roughly 30% of the league and team revenue, and still has not moved off of an offer of just under 15% in its last 2 counterproposals, the players are miffed at the threat and continue to weigh whether a strike is the next course of action. And then it goes on to say, in a separate development, ESPN also reported that the WNBA has informed players that a revenue share benchmark from the most recent 2025 season has been met, meaning the players will soon receive a total disbursement of about $8 million, although the amount each player will receive has not been finalized. So this is a remnant from the old CBA, which said that if the players were to meet a benchmark of 20% over a certain benchmark, compounded annually, they would trigger a revenue sharing threshold and would be eligible for whatever revenue sharing was above that benchmark. And so the league was able to achieve these benchmarks even though they had 2 seasons where they were essentially operating completely in the red, those being the 2021 and 2022 seasons. Due to COVID, they had essentially no income from ticket sales, no income from merchandising. Despite those 2 essentially lost seasons where they were completely operating in the red, they were able to make up not only the debt that was incurred by operating those 2 seasons at a loss, but also they were able to make up that 20% compounded annually benchmark to the degree that they were able to get $8 million worth of revenue to share amongst the player base. This has a huge impact in terms of the negotiations and what the players' discussions can be moving forward, because it completely eliminates the narrative that the league is operating at a loss. The league has been traditionally operating at a loss, but in the last few years, not only has it been operating in the black, but the growth that the league has exhibited, especially in the 2024 and 2025 seasons, was so explosive that it completely erased the deficits that were created by by the COVID seasons, but not only did it erase those deficits, but it also was allowed them to meet the 20% annually compounded benchmark year over year, which was a feat that was thought by most financial analysts to be completely out of the realm of possibility. Not only did the players achieve this benchmark, but they exceeded it to the degree that now they have $8 million with which to share with the entire player base, and also all of the players that participated in the league during the life of the last CBA. So that development by itself, but also coupled with the league's insistence, or the league sort of dropping the bomb on them that either March 10th deadline needs to be met, or we were necessarily going to lose games, when the players' perception has been that the league has been slowballing them. They have, that entire month of January where there was no movement from the league whatsoever, and they had a player offer on the table for that 6-week period. Now the league wants to drop a deadline on them. The player base is super upset about that. They're super angry about that, and they think that the league has been playing games with them, which, to be clear, they're right. The league has been playing games with them, but we are in a situation right now where you can't allow, in my opinion, personal feelings get in the way of making the deal and making sure that the season occurs, because all of this stuff, all of this great news about revenue sharing, all of this stuff is put in jeopardy if the league and if the Players Association cannot come to an agreement on a new CBA, and we end up losing games, because it completely risks all of the momentum that clearly has been built by the WNBA and by the WNBA Players Association, and turning it into a financial generator that exceeds the NBA, a financial generator that exceeds Major League Baseball, a financial generator that exceeds hockey, a financial generator in the sports world that is rivaled and eclipsed only by the NFL in terms of generating power. Now, is that sort of interest generation going to last? Is this sort of bubble going to continue? Maybe, maybe not. But to jeopardize it right now at the peak of its powers, when they're just about to reap the rewards from a new media rights deal and from the inclusion of new expansion teams, all of that is put into jeopardy by a strike. And so those are the table stakes, but it also is kind of where the players' minds are at right now in terms of how to proceed moving forward, because now they're upset, now they're angry, now they feel like the league has been playing games with them. And so with that mentality going into the players meeting that was referenced by the Sports Business Journal article, that players meeting occurred last Tuesday evening. And according to Annie Constable from Front Office Sports, the meeting was contentious, the meeting was heated, the meeting was a lot of a heated discussion. Basically, everybody on the Zoom call yelling at each other essentially is kind of what the meeting devolved into. Let's take a look at what the article has to say. The WNBPA held a virtual meeting with its members on Tuesday evening to discuss the state of labor negotiations. The tone quickly became tense as players discussed the best path forward, according to multiple sources with direct knowledge of the meeting. One of the causes of disagreement between the players, according to multiple sources, is the approach to a potential strike. Players authorized a potential strike in a near unanimous vote in mid-December, but some players have changed their minds since. One source said more than half of player leadership reaffirmed their commitment to striking if necessary. The strike vote authorized the union's executive committee, made up of 7 players and led by President Nneka Ogwumike, to call a strike whenever it felt it was necessary. And then a letter sent from the executive director, obtained by Front Office Sports, verified the tone of Tuesday's meeting. In it, she said, "Last night's conversation was spirited, passionate, and at times tough." Jackson went on to say that this signaled the health of their union. Honest debate is not division, it is engagement. Okay, so this is the players' meeting that we've been talking about, and it has been contentious. As I said, even according to the Players Association themselves, saying that it was spirited, passionate, and at times tough. I mean, basically they were in the call yelling at each other. And my reaction is that this is not surprising to me at all. Of course, we've got a players association that is comprised of more than 150 players at this point. And so you're going to have opinions all over the spectrum. You're going to have players like Tosh Cloud who have been very outspoken on this issue that basically are not going to be happy until the players have a 50-50 gross split, just like other leagues have. And to be clear, that is not something that is on the table for this collective bargaining agreement. It's not something that's going to be on the table for many collective bargaining agreements, probably. But there are going to be players on the other side of the equation as well. Players that are not in a financial position to absorb the hit that is going to be taken from lost games. And now that the rubber is meeting the road, now that it is looking more and more like a strike is an actual possibility, and now that apparently in this player meeting, they are discussing what the best strategy is for that strike to take, now players are saying, well, wait a minute, we didn't necessarily mean for it to get to that point. And so I'm not surprised that the meeting was contentious. I'm not surprised that there are players on both sides of the issue. But really the only thing in my mind that matters is there the will to do the strike or not? Because if there is the will to do the strike, both in the player base and on the executive committee, then it really doesn't matter what the ratio is. It could be 51% in favor, 49% against, or it could be 99% in favor and 1% against. It doesn't really matter as far as the eventual outcome is concerned, because either they're going to do the strike or they're not. And if they are going to do the strike, then they need to hold fast to that commitment, because it's the only point of leverage that they still have. It's the only point of leverage that they've ever had. And the league has calculated, as I've said before, that ultimately they're going to decide not to do the strike, and that the league isn't going to have to move off of their 70% net offer that they have continually stood upon. If the league thought that it had to move off of that 70% net offer in order to avert a strike, they would have done so already. So as long as their calculation continues to be that we can avert a strike while still maintaining our stance, they're going to continue to do that. So the most important thing out of this meeting is that the will to do a strike still exists, because it does remain their only point of leverage. Secondly, my reaction is from this article and from other articles that have been released over the week is that the league is still moving behind the scenes as if there is going to not be a strike. We've already seen their schedule that they released. They've been talking to teams behind the scenes about what things are going to look like once the CBA is signed. They're preparing their teams for that. If the league actually believed that there was going to be a strike, they would be preparing teams for what the strike was going to look like. But that discussion has not been had to all available reporting. So at that point, the league is still operating with the mentality that there is not going to be a strike. And as far as the newsworthiness of this meeting, the main takeaway is going to be that the player base still does have the will to do the strike. Now, I would personally estimate that it's probably around a 30% number of players that don't want to do the strike, but that is a pure guess on my part. However, there are enough players out there that don't want to do the strike, whether it is the high-profile players that stand to lose a lot financially if the league is delayed, or the minimum contract players that stand to lose the most and may have trouble making ends meet if the league doesn't play this year. They all have player representatives and agents, and those agents have asked to be more involved in these CBA negotiations. And so let's talk a little bit about that. This is from Alexa Philippou. This article was released 2 days ago, February the 26th, and the article essentially is a slew of prominent WNBA player agents sent a letter on Thursday to WNBPA Executive Director Terry Carmichael Jackson expressing, quote, our collective preference for transparency and coordinated communication with agents moving forward in collective bargaining agreement negotiations. The nearly dozen agents who signed the letter also asked for the ability to review the league's current proposal for a new CBA at this stage of the negotiations. With time being of the essence, alignment and shared information will best serve the players and the union, the letter said. And I think this is maybe one of the most significant developments in the CBA so far, because not only does it signify that there is a divided player base and that divided player base wants to have a voice at the table in these negotiations, it's the job of the WNBA PA to get the best deal possible for the player base as a whole. But it is these individual agents' responsibility to get their individual players the best possible outcome as far as those individual players are concerned. And there's no tiptoeing around it anymore. We know that a compromise number exists. It is out there somewhere. We have a lot of people talking about what that number could be. Media have suggested compromise numbers. Fans have suggested compromise numbers. A lot of people have suggested a compromise number, which we have determined is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of the 20 to 22% gross revenue vicinity. That compromise number is something that needs to be suggested soon by either the league or the player base. And the fact that the league has not moved off of their 70% net revenue share and the Players Association are only approaching that compromise number in very small increments, now the adults have entered the chat, so to speak. I think that the agents are coming in here to save the Players Association from itself, to prevent the Players Association pursuit of the perfect offer being the enemy of the Players Association pursuit of a good offer. And I think that that's kind of where we stand right now with the player agents getting involved. And so all this to say, contentious meeting, the aftermath of that contentious meeting led to the involvement of player agents. But the most important thing, according to Sports Business Journal, seems like the will to strike still exists. And so all of this culminated last night in the WNBA players making their counter proposal to the league. And we turn back to Andy Constable, and the WNBA sent a counter-proposal to the WNBA Friday evening that included slight changes to the revenue share that players are seeking and team-provided housing. In the last proposal, the union asked for a 27.5% share of total team and league revenue over the course of the deal. The latest asked for a 26% share over the life of the deal. They are still also asking for a $9.45 million salary cap. So, again, this is an offer that is an incremental step toward getting to that compromise number that we were talking about earlier, that compromise number of 22% or around 22% gross revenue. It is not a sufficient offer by the Players Association, and it is not something that I expect the league to agree to. I personally don't know what to expect from the league. At this point, it seems clear that the will to strike does still exist within the player base and that they are willing to crash this train if they need to. I do think that the league needs to move off of their 70% net revenue share. They need to start increasing their offer at least incrementally, and we need to see that in their next offer. If we don't see that, if they don't move off of that offer, I would say that we're looking at a strike. But if the league is able to move off of that offer, if they switch their language to gross revenue share at all as a player, I would say that would be sufficient for me to say, yes, this is a good enough offer, because we can, as I've discussed before, as long as the language changes from net revenue share over to gross revenue share, that gross number can be negotiated up in future collective bargaining agreements. But the language change is the key, and that is the thing that the players need to be gunning for in this round of negotiations. But I genuinely don't know what to expect from there. If we don't see an offer that is increased from the league in terms of their revenue sharing, I don't think that the players are going to stand for it. I do think the players at that point will pull the trigger on a strike, but we'll see, because as I've said before, the league's entire calculation has been that it's not going to be necessary for them to move off of that offer in order for them to avert a strike, and that's why they haven't done so yet. But right now, from everything that we've seen, the Players Association is upset, and the will still exists to do a strike. And so as long as those two things are true, then it is certainly possible that they would vote to do a strike. And at some point, you're risk calculation has to change if you're the league, right? Because if you've got all of these billions of dollars at stake and you've got shareholders that you are obliged to do what is in their best financial interest, at some point the calculation changes, because now the percentage chance of them doing a strike is much greater than it was prior to this week, prior to this round of negotiation. And the more that we get toward that March 10th deadline, the more pressure is going to be on the league and on the players, frankly, to have a resolution to this. So we're not out of the woods yet. We're not even close to out of the woods yet. It's going to depend on what the WNBA's opinion as far as their risk calculation is concerned. If they continue to think that they can get a deal done without moving off of their revenue share stance, they will continue to offer the exact same revenue share stance and not move off of it. But as soon as they calculate that the risk of the Players Association doing a strike and the losses that would come from the Players Association doing a strike outweigh the losses that would come from the league moving off of their net versus gross stance, as soon as that calculation changes and the weights tip in the other direction, that's when you're going to see movement from the league. So we're going to see whether or not this is a bluff by the Players Association and whether the league decides to call the bluff, or is this the point where the league finally decides that it is time to move and it is time to end this. What do you guys think? Do you think that we are in a point right now where the league still has the runway to call the Players Association's bluff? Do you think that it is actually a bluff, or do you think that the Players Association is willing to crash the plane? Let me know in the comments. Please, ladies and gentlemen, make sure, if you're not subscribed already, to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button as well, share the analysis with your friends. We are already at 150 subscribers to the channel, which is amazing. I never thought that people would care what I have to say about this sort of thing all that much. I cannot wait to be done with this CBA one way or the other so that we can talk about other things. I can't wait to talk about Caitlin and Team USA. I can't wait to talk about the Fever and what the Fever may do or may not do in free agency. I can't wait to actually talk about honest to God basketball games. I can't wait to sit and analyze basketball games with you, but all of that is in the future. Right now, what we're talking about is the CBA and whether or not it gets resolved, because everything flows from the resolution to the CBA. Cap analysis, free agency analysis, all that sort of stuff, it all comes after the CBA is resolved. So hopefully we can get that soon. Ladies and gentlemen, again, please make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.